In the debate with Lauren Southern, during the second part of it, we had discussions on BLM protests and the riots and the rest of it. Now, the main disagreement in that segment was probably about the 93% statistic, which is one that I cite frequently, and it seems to be a pretty good statistic. I was told that it had been debunked, and I was sent a Newsweek article to show that it had been debunked. It wasn't a good Newsweek article. I went over it in the debate. You'll see it there. But another thing that was discussed there was really honing in on one aspect of my opening statement. Now, in this, I'm going to clarify exactly what I mean in the opening statement, what I meant, I guess, and like what my position on it is.
Let me anticipate those objections straight away.
In the opening statement, we were discussing the violence and the credibility of Black Lives Matter and of the protests and riots that occurred in the summer of 2020. Now, my main points consisted of stating that I think BLM is good. I think the protests are good. I really respect, the right to protest is one of the fundamental amendment rights that we have in the United States of America. Oh, we have, I'm not American, but that people in the United States of America have. And it's a super important one, and it should be used to voice civil grievances people might have with the institutions and the way society functions as a whole. Also, in my opening statements, I very explicitly and very clearly condemned like rioting and violence. Obviously, it's not conducive to political ends. It tends to have negative material effects on the communities in which the rioting occurs in, and overall, just a bad thing. Even though it's correct of me to condemn the rioting and say that, hey, it's not a good thing. It still doesn't remove from the ability for us to understand from where they're caused and to try to remediate those effects. But the thing that caused the majority of the controversy here was when I made the following statement. Out of the 7% that were violent, because 93% appear to have been non-violent, according to the best information I currently have available and that I have seen on the given topic, not all of those were instigated by, civil rights protesters or Black Lives Matter protesters. There is, empirical, there is evidence to suggest that there were a number of agitators from all around the political spectrum that also went in there in an attempt to start violence and just generally to perhaps incite a riot. Now, why might they do this? Obvious. It makes BLM, it makes the movement look really bad. To clarify even more, because I've already clarified this like 6 times during the debate, but it's still being brought up as a talking point. This is not to say that the majority or a large percentage or anything of those 7% were caused by external agitators, because it is literally impossible to know that information. The only purpose of my statement was to add more nuance into having a proper understanding and a multifaceted understanding of exactly how those 7%, arise. And in there I said that, hey, there was a portion of right-wing, far right-wing, like white supremacists, for instance, agitators that went in there in an attempt to cause violence. And there were also white Antifa kid, left-wing agitators that went in there, super riled up or whatever, which ended up causing, creating violence and, aggression and just general contempt, which could have escalated to a riot. And then in addition to that, there's probably just, there being a general, a large sense of anger and frustration within the existing protests that could have led to the community. So I guess an internal example of a riot being produced, so to say. And that was literally the extent of my statement, just to provide with some more nuance here. I think this is important because I believe in understanding the causes of a wide range of things as effectively as possible and ensuring that we consider all forms of possibilities. So it's obviously not an attempt for me to detract from the violence or the potential riot starting of actual BLM protesters, so to say, because regardless if that percentage was 7%, all of them were entirely caused by actual BLM protesters, or if it was 1%, you would still condemn the actions of those BLM protesters, regardless of what the percentages are there, because regardless of if it's 7% or if it's 1%, it's still a minority of all the total protests, and to encourage them not to fucking do that. Yeah, and that was fundamentally the end of it. So it's not trying to detract from real protesters, eventually engaging in violence, or so to say. They will be condemned just the same. The only purpose is to be like, hey, there is multiple aspects to this. Like all things, like all societal phenomena, like all historical events, it's complicated. There's a lot of different actors involved in it. How this, in my opinion, fairly, agreeable and non-controversial statement was taken was that I basically said, or according to a lot of people, including Lauren Southern, I said that all of the right-wing riot, or all of the BLM riots, were caused by right-wing agitators. And that's all the violence, that the actual like left-wing progressive BLM people actually never did any violence ever, and it was all right-wing agitators, which I have never said in my entire life, and it would be a very silly thing for me to say. In my recent Twitter discussion with Lauren Southern, which the video on that is already out, or should be out by the time you watch this. If you're watching this on stream, then it's not out yet because you just saw it 15 minutes ago. But yeah, so I made this this video about Lauren Southern very much seeming to care about Swedish immigration, despite her saying that, oh, she doesn't want to care about it, as an attempt to deflect from a debate. And she said, dude went through all my videos over the past 7 years and 5 years. Basically, she doesn't know what to count. I covered this in my last video. But then she also says here in a quote tweet, dude went through, oh, sorry, my bad, in a response to this. Also, I'm still waiting on a shred of evidence that right-wingers started any BLM riots in 2020, as you asserted in our debate the other day with Mr. Fanatic. If you have none, an apology for spreading misinformation, perhaps? Serious conspiracy nut job there at Rose Wrist. So, the burden of proof on me at this point is to provide an example in which a right-wing instigator try to contribute or contributed to violence that eventually spurred into a riot. This is a very low bar for me to prove, because remember, I never stated like a specific percentage of like riots or, like a majority or minority that were caused by like external instigators. I just said that there is evidence to suggest that there were external instigators as well, which is objectively true. And in support of this statement, I provided 4 links on the actions of this person called the Umbrella Man.
In short, a man who, despite the best efforts of everyone involved, has not been found guilty of anything or even identified, just a simple, anonymous rando from a single BLM riot who is alleged to be right-wing by an unverifiable source to a credulous media, and all because he hit a window with an umbrella. That was Rose Wrist's smoking gun.
Who has been identified as being a white supremacist, being part of white supremacist gangs, and been, part of the instigating piece of violence that ends up devolving into a riot at further points. So here is the timeline according to Forbes, which, right-leaning center, like magazine, but yeah. So the video, filmed 2 days after the death of George Floyd, shows a masked man carrying an umbrella smashing the windows of an AutoZone, earning him the nickname Umbrella Man before being confronted by a protester and fleeing. Receiving an email tip last week, the police suspect the man is a member of the Hells Angels biker gang who sought to sow discord and racial unrest through his vandalism, which includes spray painting free shit for everyone zone on the building's doors. While not identified or charged yet, now I will get to a search warrant of this person a bit later, the 32-year-old man has been connected to a gang called the Aryan Cowboy Brotherhood, nice, and reportedly took part in the June incident in Stillwater, Minnesota, while he and other members verbally harassed a Muslim woman. In the affidavit, police investigators Erica Christensen said the man's actions led to the subsequent fires and rioting that took place in the city. The AutoZone was eventually burnt down. The rioting also led to Minneapolis' 3rd precinct to burn down, and according to Minnesota Gov, Tim Walz, resulting in $500 million of property damage. So there is a fair bit of evidence that seems to suggest that, hey, this person doesn't seem like the most BLM type person. They were there explicitly causing violence, and the violence specifically in the AutoZone place also ended up leading into like more violence, so to say. And then there's also a search warrant here, which I can link in the connection to this topic, which also has to do with the Umbrella Man. It's the same given individual. I can try my best to remember to link this in the description of the video as well for people to check out if they want to read it. So, how was this taken? What did I just say? How was this taken? Sorry, my bad. By Lauren Southern. Well, in response to me linking these things, and also saying now for the 16th time, the point of this is merely to say that there were cases in which right-wing agitators started riots, not that they accounted for all/most of them. And Lauren's response to this is, Blue ANON is real. This guy said in a debate with me the other day that there's strong evidence right-wingers started riots, and that maybe some violence was caused by a few cringed Antifa. His evidence? A video of a man who was never identified or charged. Nice meme.
Just because you allege a conspiracy was responsible for a tiny thing doesn't make the accusation any less crazy. In other words, however much weight he assigned to it, this is an extraordinary claim which requires extraordinary evidence. I mean, an accusation like this is on par with people who claim the Capitol riot was all a big plot started by Antifa. Surely Roserist had significant evidence that right-wingers started some, even just one, BLM riot in 2020. And when asked, to his credit, he didn't just try to shift the goalposts or something. No, he proudly and confidently posted his evidence, which was an article about Umbrella Man.
So, number one, let's work through this. Literally, like multiple affidavits, a search warrant as well, and an identification of the given individuals as being part of the Aryan Brotherhood or whatever that was called. Probably not the most BLM-friendly organization. But the comparison to QAnon is fucking laughable, okay? QAnon wish that they had search warrants and mainstream media accountable like publications writing on the stuff that they were talking about and claiming it to be, eventually what happened. Or actually what happened. So the conflation here between QAnon and me providing a specific example in which an individual identified as being a white supremacist came in, agitating, causing violence, which eventually, throughout the course of the day, ended up in a riot, as being the same as QAnon is completely laughable. To further clarify this, I made a subsequent follow-up tweet. Wrong! I stated that there were left-wing agitators, just as there were right-wing agitators, at BLM protests that attempted to escalate violence and potentially start a riot. And here is the search warrant, by the way. And to this, there wasn't really there wasn't any response from her. So, let's just state this once again. Statement is not that the majority or a substantial portion, this is impossible to know, of the BLM riots were caused by right-wing agitators. It is impossible to know such a thing. The statement I was merely making is that there is conclusive evidence to support the fact that there were external agitators present at these protests who tried to instigate violence in an attempt to turn into a riot, which would potentially lead to a worse media perception and public perception of BLM as a movement and of the causes they're fighting for. And the statement I supported with one specific example of this Umbrella Man who has been, identified, has been written on by a wide range of mainstream media publications and has had a literal search warrant filed, on him, so to say. And that I think that, meets the threshold of evidence I need to prove to substantiate my initial claim. This has been blown completely out of proportion and made to, be that I suggested that all or a majority, or that there were a wide range of cases in which, all the riots that occurred were on the basis of right-wing agitators, which is something I have never stated and would never state. So once again, it's an example of an incredibly uncharitable interpretation of what I stated, away from something that is super sensible and super easy to defend, into something that is just, completely divorced from anything we're talking about, a statement that nobody made and would be an indefensible statement, so to say. Now, just like the other segment, I'm going to say the reason behind this being the case, behind this being latched onto, is because the rest of the arguments that we made there were extremely strong. We made in that specific segment of the debate. So at that point, the goal of the opposition is to latch onto the smallest thing that they can misinterpret and make the debate about that. Me and Fanatic stated on multiple occasions that, number one, this isn't crucial to the debate. Number two, we could literally concede everything here and it would have no impact on our overall argument. And number three, we're correct on this. We've met the threshold that we provided in our opening statement, which wasn't a high threshold to meet because it wasn't a controversial statement. It wasn't a statement that required a high degree of proof in order to substantiate properly. So yeah, that's another piece of addition or additional evidence, because if I know the right-wing internet communities well enough, this is going to be one of the ones, or one of the cases of things that are going to stick around, especially if you have somebody 188 times the Twitter following of myself stating that I've said something or that I made a statement which I never have. So I'm just making this video preemptively as a form of like deflection and a walking through of all the statements that were made in order to ensure that we're all on the right page, so to say, and that and that this type of misinformation doesn't spread. But yeah, crazy comparisons to QAnon there. QAnon wish they had the sort of evidence that me and Fanatic have to substantiate our claims. So yeah.